For those of you who don't know me, my name is Russell Bowlin. I am one of the pastors here, and it's good to be in worship with you this day. I know that we have some who are resuming classes tomorrow morning, and some who are starting classes for the first time tomorrow morning. So I welcome you back from summer.
At some point, hopefully, you could ease into it, so blow your eardrums out.
All right. But it's good to be gathered together. It's good to be on the cusp of a new school year and the excitement, but also some of the anxiety that comes with that. And so I welcome you to worship, and I wanted to bid you welcome to another year of school year of serving God together. I wanted to talk to you this morning about something. This happened about 30 years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. I was in first grade, and if you want to do the math to figure out how old that makes me, then you can do that. But you've got to do that work because school starts tomorrow, and you need to get used to doing math again. So it was almost 30 years ago, and I was standing in line. I was in first grade. I was standing in line, and I forget if we were going to lunch or recess or whatever, but I was standing in line because that's what you do in third grade when you're in the hallway, and I was standing right next to the fire extinguisher. And the fire extinguisher box that we had when I was in first grade in this particular part of the school, there you go, was one that if you pressed it, it would come open. Ours doesn't work like that. But you know those latches that if you press it, it kind of pops open, right? And so I was standing right next to that. I was a little bit shorter then, a little bit. And I was standing there, and I was, having fun with my friends, and we were doing what first grade boys do, which is push each other. And my friend pushed me into the fire extinguisher box, and the door popped open. We went over this. The door popped open, and I panicked and had a moment of just like, what do I do? Because that's what first grade kids do, right? I've never encountered this before. What do I do? And so I did what was the normal thing to do, and I shut it, and I pushed it closed, and at that moment I turned and made eye contact with a teacher. And that teacher saw me closing the door and immediately came over and said, "Come with me, young man. We're going to the principal's office." And I tried to, but I didn't do anything, and it was no use. There was no talk. We were going to the principal's office. And I felt all the blood leave my face, and I thought, oh no, this is it. My life is over. And I'm only in first grade. And I went to the principal's office, and I was just, scared, shaking in my, whatever, shoes I had begged my mother for before we started school that year. And I just thought, this is how it all ends. Will they even remember my name? And then the principal came in, and the principal, this was back, I don't know if this was like year-round, but there was this big push that year that the principal ends with P-A-L. And so the principal is your pal. So friendly, principals. And so, but anyway, and so that, I felt a little bit better, be like, this is my pal, but still the principal's office. And so I thought that things were going to go poorly. And the principal walked in and asked me, hey, what happened? And I said, well, I can't remember who my friend was that pushed me in. We weren't that good of friends, apparently. But we were standing in line. My friend pushed me, and the door popped open. I closed it, and the teacher saw me. I won't throw her under the bus, but I can remember her name. And I closed the door, and at that moment, the teacher must have thought that I was playing with the fire extinguisher, and so here I am. And the principal was like, "Oh, okay. All right, do you need anything?" No. Well, get back to class. Is that it? Yeah. Okay. And we were done. And it was over. And I lived to tell about it. But I had a healthy fear, and I still do. I have a healthy fear of authority. Authority figures, those who hold power over me. I still kind of have the Fraggle Rock, for those who are old enough to understand that reference, when they would hear the farmer or the bad guy, I can't remember his name, but you just kind of start doing this, right? You have that shaking of, I had this healthy fear of authority figures, and I still do. And I believe that as I was stepping into the principal's office, I was stepping into the room of wrath. And I was about to get it from on high. But that's not how it went. That's not how it went. Israel also had a healthy fear of authority, of God's authority, of Yahweh. And the first few verses of our passage today speak of Israel's experiences with Yahweh when they came to Sinai and when they witnessed God's power and God's might and God's authority in what God did at Sinai and the giving of the law and the encountering of the holy that can make you say, holy, 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 right? Yeah. And that experience with God in Sinai, on Sinai, was like the hot stove. That was the hot stove moment for Israel. And then that vision, that understanding of God at Sinai is contrasted within this passage with that of Zion, which is the same mountain, but is understood differently, is viewed differently, is viewed as a hopeful place, a place of salvation, a place of rest, a place of not wrath, but of God's kindness and God's deliverance. It's instead of a hot stove, Zion becomes the warm welcome instead of the hot stove. Now, with all the talk in our passage of the burning and the shaking, I think it's difficult to read this passage and not have that shaking feeling of terrified fear. To not hear this passage, it's tricky. If you just read it on the surface, it's tricky, I think, to hear it as anything other than a threat because of the language that it speaks. And that ending line, we'll deal with that in a little bit. But this isn't how I see this passage, and this is not how I see the whole narrative of what God is telling us in all of Scripture is not that of a threat. Because Jesus gets involved. Jesus gets involved, and I have a hard time understanding that if Jesus was God, which we believe, if Jesus was God, then it doesn't make sense then if this is all a threat, then for Jesus to come and he didn't have to suffer, but he did. He could have been that heavy. He could have been that wrath from on high. But that wasn't the way it happened. That in Jesus we see God revealing, not for the first